should continue with the vintage watch band series by talking about vintage rubber straps. Vintage rubber straps are sort of an odd, murky field of collecting in that there isn't that much known about them, but they're an integral part of vintage watch collecting, and I really think they add to a lot of old dive watches as far as aesthetics and comfort. So let's explore it to the best of my ability. Again, the history on this is a bit murky, so I'm telling you what I know, and if I make any mistakes, I'm happy to be corrected. These types of rubber straps basically came about because there was a growing desire for the average consumer in probably between the 50s and the 60s to start diving, to do sport diving. And for not quite sure why metal bracelets weren't as desirable. Perhaps it had something to do with the need for something that would be compressible. But for whatever reason, all dive watch manufacturers started relying on rubber straps. And if you look at old catalogs, you'll typically see them in it, or like pictures of Jacques Cousteau or whoever else. They'll typically be wearing these types of straps. And this particular aesthetic, many people refer to as the basket weave pattern because it has that little molding going along its body. And different brands had different designs, but mostly it's sort of the same kind of aesthetic. Now, when you look at them, they have these ridges on the side. If I had to guess, that's to keep the keeper from slipping back and forth. And that's the general aesthetic. They're vulcanized rubber. They're very stretchy, very pliable, and yet they're remarkably low profile. And if you think about the fact that these things are like 50 years old, and yet they're so pliable and so soft and so stretchy, it's just absolutely amazing, because oftentimes even vintage leather straps of the same vintage are falling apart by now. So I don't know exactly what it is about these straps, but they're remarkably durable. Now, typically the brand you hear linked to these is a brand called Tropic. They were initially made in Switzerland and possibly later in Hong Kong. Now, how you figure that out, what it is you flip these guys over and you look at the markings. Now, I don't have a basket weave style Tropic, but I do have other style Tropics. And when you flip them over, you'll notice that the molding of the Tropic is super sharp and clean. On the other branded ones, you'll also see decent quality, like Modèle Déposé or just your trademark or sub 18. It's pretty sharp as far as the molding goes. But then you'll look at the copies that usually don't have a brand on it, like these. You'll see that in comparison, these 1118s here aren't nearly as sharp and neat as the molds on these two, and that's usually how you tell that it's a copy. Now, when I say copy, I don't mean like a copy of a Rolex or something like that. It's just apparently this was a popular type of rubber strap, and other manufacturers were making them. In my experience, they're all equally pliable and comfortable, and as far as wearing it, you can't really tell the difference if it's Tropic or if it's a no brand. And again, in these two cases, these are no brands, this is a sub brand, but they're all just as pliable and comfortable, and knock on wood, I've never had any catastrophic failure, and I've never heard of anyone describing catastrophic failure with these types of straps. One last thing I just want to mention, typically if you're looking for them, they come in two types aside from the different widths. You'll have straight or you'll have a curved edge, and the curved are typically more expensive. And to be honest, if you're taking pictures of your watch, I guess maybe the curved makes sense in that respect, but to be honest, the curved end isn't articulated like it would be in a metal bracelet. So when it swivels, it just goes like this. So from a functional perspective, the curved edge really doesn't make much of a difference unless you're just taking pictures of it flat. So I don't really recommend paying more money to get a curved one, because it's just going to swivel loosely like that. So it doesn't really add anything to the aesthetic when wearing it. And that completes our talk on basket weave. Next, we'll talk the other types, and actually have a bunch of real Tropics. The other types, these are a bit more modern. If I had to guess, these are probably like the 1970s. These are the big hole variants, or not necessarily the big hole in this case, but these are sort of more modern looking ones than the basket weave ones. And these were very popular in the 70s, and they came in different colors and different widths. And the prices on these Tropics, especially the big hole ones that go up to like 22 millimeters, are just absolutely insane. But in this particular case, they sort of have like a leather type of mold onto them. I don't really know why. It's more modern, more streamlined, and obviously you don't have any teeth or anything like that on these. And just the same, these are stretchy, these are supple, and these are even lower profile and just as tapered as the basket weaves here. As far as thickness, mostly the same. But these are, again, are a bit more modern than something like this. This really sort of screams, in my mind, like the 1960s, whereas this is more sort of fresh and funky 1970. So there's that. They came with, as far as Tropics go, they came in different designations for these types. Like, this is a Tropic Sport, this type is a Tropic Star, and this is another Tropic Sport. And they came in like orange, yellow colors. They're very hard to come by and very expensive when you do, but they were pretty popular. And I guess for certain people, if you really want to perhaps mix and match the color of the strap to match the dial or something. But again, with these, it gets really expensive. So this is the other type of Tropics that existed. So we've covered the basket weaves, we've covered the sort of large hole types. And then another big brand in the 70s was Isofrane. Now, I had a marked Isofrane, but I stupidly sold it a while ago. I suspect that this is an Isofrane, but I can't be certain. It has the traditional buckle that Isofranes have, but I'm not sure as it's unmarked. But it's also pretty high quality. Again, super stretchy, very pliable, and very thin. So it's really wearable and very comfortable on a day-to-day basis. There were different variations of the Isofrane. Here is a more modern take on it by an Italian company called Bonetto Centurini, I believe. It's an Italian manufacturer of rubber straps that still makes these types of straps. Now, this is also, again, sort of a copy of an older Isofrane with their unique wedge at the edge. This is probably from like the late 90s, and I have another one I got from Time Factors. That's probably from the 2000s. I don't really like these, even though this is a nod to more vintage straps, because, first of all, it's thicker. It doesn't seem like it's that much thicker in this case. Or perhaps if we compare it to like the basket weave. Whoops. There we go. Eyeballing it, it doesn't look like it's much thicker, but for some reason, comfort-wise, it feels a lot more restrictive and not so comfortable. And also, it's not tapered, which I personally don't like. So it just really sort of uncomfortably grips your wrist, and I've never really been able to wear these two comfortably. And another interesting thing, these are both rubber, and again, this is probably from like the 60s, maybe 70s. This is from like the late 90s, and this is already not nearly as supple and soft as this was. I can't really explain that, but I have two straps like that, and they're both the same. They're starting to slightly harden, and I just don't really care for them. But Isofranes also, especially vintage Isofranes, are extremely expensive. People really like to match them up with Omega dive watches of the 70s, so they're not so easy to come by anymore. Both Tropic and Isofrane, I think someone has purchased their intellectual property, and they're making new straps under those names, respectively. But from what I've seen, they're much thicker, and they don't really, they might look the same, but their thickness and just clunkiness, I think, really doesn't do the vintage ones justice. So that's my take on the newer ones. I'm in general not a fan of getting new reissues of anything if I could help it. But that's what we have for Isofranes. And I have a few other sort of, I guess you can call, copies of the big hole Tropics. Like I mentioned, this is a Tropic Sport, and it has that sort of leather aesthetic there. Here's an unbranded one that also is pretty similar. The molding on the numbers there is pretty good, despite it not having a name. And again, like I said before, it wears just as comfortable as the branded one. Same thing, super stretchy, super pliable. It's just absolutely amazing. I mean, just looking at these two, it's just absolutely amazing to think they're made of basically the same material. And this is at least twice, if not 3 times as old as this. And these have just aged so much better than a more modern take on the vintage rubber strap. Last but not least, I have some Japanese straps. Not rubber, but I'm pretty sure these are polyurethane. These are 2 of Seiko's more well-known dive straps, the GL 831 and the DAL 1BP. These, I think, are from the 90s, possibly early 80s. And I suspect they're polyurethane because they dry out and they just start cracking and get very, very brittle. They're definitely not wearable. As you see, it's starting to distort, it's starting to crack, and eventually this thing is just gonna fall apart. I don't know, I mean, I'm happy to be corrected, but my gut feeling is that this is polyurethane and not rubber. But it's, again, noticing a pattern here. How do you have something from the 1960s, maybe 1970s, that's still so durable and reliable, and then as you get newer and newer type of dive straps, they get lower and lower quality as far as durability. It's a bit of a strange observation for me, but that's the observation I can make based on the things I have. And I could, I guess, end it by just showing what some watches look like with the straps. Here's a Benthos Aquastar, another Aquastar, Tropic Star. Here's a 6139 on a curved Tropic basket weave copy, which is super, super comfortable. And here's an Eterna Kontiki on another Tropic basket weave copy. Just, they're really amazing, comfortable straps, and I highly recommend them if you happen to be interested in wearing these types of older sports watches. They handle large watches really, really well. And that's about it for this video, and thanks for watching.